Live stream is being prepared right now. The Afternoon Show is a safe space for men and masculine types to express their feelings and their emotions. Each month, we'll gather and come together for a live discussion to acknowledge and heal old wounds, trauma, stereotypes, and much more. We hope to make a positive impact in the hearts and minds of all who listen. So thanks for tuning in to Afternoon with the Dudes. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. We're live here with Afternoons with the Dudes. It's a monthly show that we have to bring masculine types together. And I'm excited to be here. We're talking about healing trauma, such a big topic because we all go through trauma. It's a major part of life. So I want to welcome on our guest for today. And who would like to start and jump on it and talk a little bit first? Just introduce yourselves, whoever would like to go. Maybe Brett. Say hello and what this topic means to you and what you're excited for.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Hi, as you probably remember from last month's show, I'm Brett Marchand from Chicago. And this is a really fascinating topic to talk about because it's something that I think we all go through to one degree or another. And it's something that is important to not just our emotional and psychological health, but also it can also have impact on our physical health as well. Um, I found through my own experience that um, healing trauma is something that usually works best by going through kind of like for me at least, it's a four-stage process. The first important step is to recognize what the trauma is, which might sound pretty basic, but so many times we've often buried it so deeply that we may be aware of some vague sense of not feeling the way we should, but we can't necessarily pinpoint exactly what it is. So that for me is the first step, is to recognize what the trauma is. The second step is to go on to acknowledge it. And that's important because then you're actually taking ownership of what the specific issue is. And that's important because, it's part of who you are, it's part of your past, and it's also something that you need to move beyond in order to move forward. So being able to recognize and then acknowledge what the problem is important. The third step is the ability to express what the feeling is. And that might take a little bit of an effort because if you've kept it locked inside all this time, you might not necessarily feel comfortable coming forward to talk about it, whether it's with friends or a counselor or even just, to yourself, perhaps in a journal or in a meditation or something along those lines. But to be able to express exactly what it is that has been troubling you and that you need to get past is a really important step toward moving forward with all this. Now, I've found from my own experience that going through the first three phases are probably comparatively easy when you examine it in relation to the fourth step. But the fourth step is really crucial because this is where I think the real healing comes from. And that involves a step of letting go. And I think that's important to recognize because a lot of times, we may take a lot of pride in the accomplishment that we've gotten to that point, but then we get stuck. And a lot of times we end up sort of staying at that point where we've recognize, acknowledge, and express, but then don't take the last part, which is to let go of it. The reason why it's important to let go of it is the fact that this is obviously something that is no longer serving you. So you have to ask yourself, what do I gain by holding on to it? What do these negative traumatic feelings do for me? And when you look at it from that standpoint, chances are it's probably not very much. So that fourth step, being able to let go, may take the most effort to move ahead, but it also ends up being one of the most beneficial ones because it ends up empowering you to decide, I want to heal myself now. I want to rid myself of this because it's not serving me in any valuable way. I want to move forward. And it's when you get past that point that you could really give yourself the pat on the back because you've taken a huge leap in terms of healing yourself, charting a new course for yourself, um, and being able to move forward, move past the trauma, move past the hurt. And that's ultimately important, not only for, as I said, not only for your emotional and psychological health, but it can also be important for your physical health too, because oftentimes the whatever physical ailments we may have, they often have an emotional root. And they often tend to be somewhat, I guess you would call it metaphorical, where the part of your body that's affected is directly related to what the source of the trauma or the pain was in the first place. If you really want to avoid letting that physical manifestation set in, then it's important to go through those stages with regard to the feelings so that you can let go of them and set yourself on a course of mental, psychological, and physical health and well-being. So I found in my own case that that has definitely been very much uh, a valuable step. And I certainly recommend that anybody else who feels as though they're going through something like this, that they try following a course like that and see where it takes them.
Beautiful. I really appreciate, all your wisdom in this area. And yeah, I definitely agree with what you said. Holding on to trauma like that, I think, is one of the main causes of disease and people just really, being in a way unhealthy because stress and trauma, you hold that within you for so long and then ends up you have some physical ailment. It like starts to manifest physically.
Absolutely. And really, when you come right down to it, I've found that in many cases, a lot of these negative emotions that result in trauma have their root in what I would call shame. And it's not necessarily something that you brought about yourself. It's something that comes about from the way others treat you, and then you internalize it. And in many cases, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. I mean, this you're expressing part of who you are, and it may be something that other people disagree with, but they're heaping all of this negative ridicule on top of yourself, and you end up embracing it and feeling like, yeah, and maybe they're right. I mean, maybe I have to listen to what they're saying. When in many cases, it's just absolute nonsense. I mean, um, I know from my own example that um, coming to terms with being openly as a gay male, it was something that I kept being bombarded with negatively throughout all the years until I finally was in my 20s and I said, this is ridiculous. I mean, this is who I am. This is their problem, not mine. So I was able to start the process of healing whatever wounds I had associated with that for myself. But again, I had to do the math. I had to do the work. I had to go through each of those steps to realize that whatever shame or negative feelings I had internalized because of all the criticisms I had received for years, they had to go. I mean, they just weren't doing anything for me anymore. And that if I was going to be happy and healthy and open about who I was, um, those feelings had to be eliminated, and I had to be able to step forward and say, "This is who I am, and I'm like who I am, and comfortable with my lifestyle. And if you've got a problem with it, well, then that's on you. There's nothing I can do about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to keep beating myself up over something that is just part of who I am as an individual.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's, that's huge. So let's get Roots on here to talk a little bit. Has anything that Brett has said struck a chord, or anything you want to add?
Oh, there's so many amazing things. I feel so connected with you, Brett. Thank you so much for that. My name that I'm chosen, that I've been going by, is actually all names that have been gifted to me. I was born as Christopher, but largely this last year I've been Roots. The year before that I was in Flux, and most recently this year I was given Zenith as well. So it's Roots in Flux. Zenith is my preferred chosen name at this precise moment in time. And to total piggyback a lot of stuff off what Brent was talking about is, awareness of ourself, awareness of our traumas, the things that we've experienced were largely at the result of other people pushing onto us. And so our external reality stopped us from allowing our internal reality, our internal sensations and vibrations to be like, you know what? I really like this person. I should go talk to them. Oh, but I can't, because what if they don't like me because I'm gay, right? Or what if they don't like me because of X, Y, or Z factor of like whatever it is that, I look like, I'm dressed like, whatever. And it's just like, it doesn't matter. If you feel called to go do something, do it. And that's something that I personally have had to work with a lot, is allowing myself to just be like, this is where I'm at, this is what I want, versus being locked into the prison of my own thoughts, my prison of like fear, doubt, shame, guilt, ridicule from other people. That it's like, no, you can't allow external voices to now be the dominating force for your reality. And I love one of the lines of, I am comfortable with my lifestyle, because that was like a full on, like, when you accept who you are, whatever it is that you decide is, this is your reality, this is who you decide you want to be it full force. And with that absolute love, self-love, that self-compassion, you were able to radically shift ourselves. And another thing that he pointed out was like the physical manifestations of pain. That totally reminded me of Louis C. Hayes, You Can Heal Your Life, because through there she starts to break down like all the different diseases and all the different stuff that's going on within people's life and reality, and then puts it in such a way as like an affirmation of awareness. So for me, I was diagnosed with HIV very early on, and I was like 22, 23, and I felt fully disconnected from the world, fully disconnected from able to connect with anybody over anything. And what it turns out to be is that the healing factor is actually becoming aware that you are divinely connected and perfect within the wholeness of the unity. You are needed as part of the whole. And as a direct result, once I finally allowed myself to not feel shame, fear, guilt, or ridicule about being diagnosed that, because as soon as I was 22, coming out, having one of the biggest known diseases for the world at that precise moment, and I had to then work through the hate, the fear, oh, you're positive, and do all these nasty things with me because you're a dirty slut. And I was like, no, let's not go there. That's not who I am. You're not going to paint the picture of my energy, right? That's just not happening. And so within there, I then had to start working on, what does it actually mean for me to be gay? What does it actually mean for me to be a supposedly HIV person? I should highlight that I'm very much so of the impression that it is a purposely made disease, that they pump us full of chemicals to effectively kill us, or put us even further into pain and put us further into unacceptability within society. That's my personal, after like almost 7 years of just full on studying HIV, that's where I came to. That's where my spirit guides were like, no, stop taking these medicines. They are literally hurting you. I am now 4 or 5 years off of not taking medicine, and I don't hurt anymore, versus where I was hurting every single day because I was taking pills, and I kept taking the pills believing I am sick. I must take something to cure my sickness. Again, externalization of our reality versus the internal of listening towards our guides and our spirits. Because remember, I've read the Celestine Prophecy a couple of times, and in the Celestine Prophecy, it was like listening towards our own spirit, like what's going on in here makes so much more sense than what's going on up there. Sometimes our externals will fully validate And for me, it creates like a harmonic field between me and an external person. And then from there, I can listen to that. But then it's like sometimes you recognize that they're covered in like ichor and darkness, and you don't necessarily want to keep allowing that energy into your field. Like it's like turning a radio frequency and like recognizing that sometimes it's static, and like saying no to the static, and instead allowing for the ones that are like clean, crisp, clear, vibrant, beautiful voices in. For me, that's what I've chosen. So I feel like I jumped off on like 16 different subjects that have leave room for lots of other topics.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I wanted to touch on what you said about, taking all these pills. I think our society has tried to cover up our trauma, cover up our pain, cover up what we're going through with shit like pills. They're just pushing these pills all the time, constantly, for everything. They're not allowing us to really feel into the trauma that we had. They're not allowing us to connect with it and to acknowledge it. Instead, we've been taught to, cover it up. We've been taught to, take these pills because you're depressed. And instead of wondering, why am I depressed? It's like, okay, we're going to take this and maybe it will heal something, who knows? But
Yeah.
I think we're realizing and we're awakening to the fact that, one, it's okay to have trauma. It's not a bad thing. It's not like we failed at life because we've gone through something traumatic or we have this pain within us. It's part of life and it's part of what's going to move us forward. So I think we're all learning to accept what we've gone through, to accept that pain, to acknowledge it. And I think that sometimes things just need to be acknowledged. And I've noticed with myself, sometimes I've acknowledged some kind of trauma within myself. Like a lot of times, I'll go through some extreme anxiety thinking about this trauma that I've gone through. And then you do stuff to cover it up, drinking, smoking, taking pills, whatever. But the times that I've actually taken to acknowledge it, to even journal about it, to in a way write myself a letter about this trauma, it's completely allowed me to let some of that trauma go, to kind of be refreshed with my energy. And I think that that's really important, is that we all take the time to acknowledge our pain, to acknowledge our trauma, and maybe that's all you need sometimes. But there might be more to that, and it's really hard. It's really hard to accept trauma. It's really hard to work through trauma. It's not the most fun thing that we get to do on this life, but it's just as important.
I feel like that's
So
actually the point. I feel like that's totally the point, is to actually like, that's why we have them, is to like give us new things to explore, right? Traumas are like fundamentally, I'm at a space where if anybody's read Andy Weir, The Egg, right? So in that story, we're literally God coming down onto physical plane to have different experiences, and like through that, the different experiences then teach us different ways, or different ways we don't want to be. Like we chose our parents, we chose our siblings if we had any. Like we chose every aspect of our life until we get to that pinnacle point where now you get to really curate whatever it is you desire. And like just by putting it out of there into the existence, this is laws of attraction and affirmation, right? It's like I feel like in some senses I called out for this type of intellectual gathering of men, because for me that's what I asked for. I've been part of a brotherhood gathering, and they keep doing these physical exercises, and I'm like, but that's not where I'm at. I don't want to do that right now. I want to do this right here, exploring our traumas and actively working through shit. That feels good for me.
yeah.
One thing I think that you both brought forth too is that in many ways, working through something like this involves the notion of taking back your personal power, and that's something that many of us have just given away. And it leaves you feeling defenseless. It leaves you feeling in a place where you can't move forward. You feel stuck. But it's important. And, as Roots mentioned, when you look at the early days of the AIDS crisis, the four groups that were most readily affected were gay men, hemophiliacs, intravenous drug users, and Haitian immigrants. Now, somebody might say, "Well, that seems like such a diverse group. What's the common thread?" And the thing is, all four of them were groups that felt disempowered, and they all needed to take their power back in one way or another. And I think you've seen, for example, through the rise of the gay rights movement, through the rise of things like clinics offering uh, fresh needles and stuff to drug users and things like that. These manifestations of treating these things have come forward in order for people to help take their power back so that they can recognize, okay, this is who I am, this is who I want to be, this is what I want to do to change my life. And that's an important step forward, because otherwise, we could very well have been stuck with the same old garbage that we had been dealing with all those years before that. So now it's time to make the change, move ahead, heal the trauma, accept who we are, and be ourselves. Um, but as I said before, also an important thing to recognize in this is realizing when you need to let go of them as well. One of my favorite spiritual and metaphysical teachers, Carolyn Mace, talks about the idea of holding on to our wounds and the damage that can happen if we don't rid ourselves of them. She cited a case in one of her lecture series about a woman who had been traumatized physically and sexually as a young woman. And when she recognized what the trauma was and so forth, she was very eager and anxious to get over it and so forth. But what she ended up doing was spending all of her time and energy organizing support groups and gatherings for common victims and so forth. And while there is certainly an importance to that, it became her entire life. It consumed her. This was a case where the trauma was just absolutely eating her alive. And after a time, she developed ovarian cancer. So, I mean, it literally came back to get her exactly in the area where the trauma occurred in the first place. She didn't move past the point of trying to let go of it. Now, certainly what she was doing was valuable and important, but by the same token, it wasn't helping her to be able to actually get past the trauma and move forward with a plan that worked for her going forward. And I think that's something that we have to remember. I mean, when you look at men, for example, many times when men are, say, in their 50s and they get laid off from jobs, many of them often develop prostate cancer or some type of issue like that. And that's affecting a part of the body having to do with the second chakra, which is about creating, about wealth development, about being productive, and so forth. And because they've been traumatized and stifled from being able to be who they are and do what they want to do, it comes right back to them and affects them in a part of their body where those issues are being blocked, their efforts are being unmanifested, and it gets to them physically. And you know, unless they recognize what the root of that problem was to begin with, they're in for a rough ride. Not only in terms of emotional and physical issues, or emotional and mental issues, but also in terms of physical issues. So it's important to make sure that we take back our power, recognize what the source of our trouble is, and then move forward from there.
Absolutely. So I know you talked about some of, like, you gave a list of like 5 or 6 steps, but um, do you have any advice or any tips of moving on from this trauma, of taking your power back? Do you have any tricks of the trade that you've worked through, that you've developed over the years?
Well, there was one actually, and this had a physical component to it. When I was in my early 40s, I developed an unusual uh, kind of chronic pain in my shoulder. And I had absolutely no idea where this came from. I couldn't think of any accident that I had been involved in or anything like that. There didn't appear to be any kind of, you know, biological cause behind it and so forth. But I mean, it hurt like a son of a bitch. So I ended up, I went to see an acupuncturist, and he said, well, I think, we can probably help you. You've got some kind of blockage going on, and it's resting in your shoulder. And, let's do some treatments and see what happens. So I did about 4 or 5 sessions, and I noticed it was gradually starting to get better. Well, then after like the sixth session, a day after I had it, um, I had gone out to brunch with my partner at the time, and I felt this sense of anxiety coming over me that I absolutely had no clue where it was coming from. I couldn't pinpoint anything. So I got home from brunch, and all of a sudden I just started crying uncontrollably. And this went on for about an hour. And he was saying, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I said, I don't know. I have absolutely no idea why I'm doing this. But I was, wailing like a baby. And I ended up falling asleep, and I was asleep for about 8 hours. And I woke up feeling relieved, um, as though a quote unquote weight had been lifted off my shoulder, to put it mildly. So he he asked me, "What do you know what it was that you let go of?" And I said, "I have absolutely no clue." And he said, "Aren't you curious to find out?" And I thought about it for a minute, and I said to myself, no, I'm really not, because if I remembered what I let go of, I wouldn't have really let go of it. And if I try to remember it, it's like me literally casting a fishing line out and trying to bring it back.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, one of the things one of the little tips I would recommend is, if you've got some kind of, particularly if you've got a physical manifestation that you can't quite pinpoint what's wrong, try looking at acupuncture, because it literally is like sticking a pin in a balloon. Um, and if you end up having an experience like I had, where you end up going through this uncontrollable crying or other uncontrollable emotional outbursts, you can't identify the source of it, but you feel better afterward from it, just let it go. Don't try and retrieve it. Don't try and look back and say, gosh, was it something with my father, or was it something with a partner, or um, and the shoulder pain has never come back since. I mean, it's been gone for 20 years now. So um, don't
Amazing.
be afraid in letting go to let go completely, even to the point where you no longer recognize what the source of the issue may have been in the first place.
Yes, I love that. I love that a lot, and I think it's pretty powerful that you were able to have this really healing cry session, uh, and I
It was
think.
remarkable because, before I had started the acupuncture, it was getting to be kind of debilitating. Um, and after I had the session where I cried my eyes out, it just felt liberating in so many ways. Um, so
Mhm,
whatever it was I let go of, I say I have no idea what it was, but I'm glad it's gone,
mhm,
because it certainly wasn't serving me. That's the point I mentioned earlier, was the idea of letting go of things because they no longer serve you. Whatever this was, it wasn't serving me in any way. So I'm
mhm,
glad it's gone.
Yeah, and do you think that crying is a beneficial way to let go of trauma?
Yes, I absolutely do. It literally is. It's very cleansing. In some ways, it's almost like a metaphorical form of personal baptism. Where you're literally getting rid of um, what is ailing you by washing it out of your system.
Mhm.
And if the eyes, for example, are indeed the window to the soul, well, what better place to purge your soul than through your crying?
I love that, and maybe that's one of the reasons why it was um, a huge thing for society to demasculine or demasculate men for crying. Um, it seems like such a healing thing. So why did we have to go and make it such a big thing for men to not cry?
I think it's because it's been seen as, a vulnerability, and a vulnerability signals weakness, and weakness is not something that men are supposed to express. But if anything, I think the willingness to be able to do that shows a strength that, is really very important to recognize, because it means, yes, you are willing and able to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to allow yourself to be able to express what you're thinking and feeling, and potentially, as it was in my case, to rid yourself of it, which ultimately just made me stronger in the long run.
Hmm. I love
I
that.
think fundamentally that's actually strength. It's truly showing up for yourself, allowing yourself to kind of witness whatever it is that's kind of come up for you, whatever traumas, etc. To kind of piggyback off you, like how I actually, stopped taking the medicines was by like literally sitting there and like feeling the pain, recognizing where it was at in my body, and then asking my body, what's wrong? What am I doing? What am I doing that's causing this? What has come up for me? How can I help you heal? Like, and I was just like litany of this. And this was like in my meditations. I was like, I don't know what's up. Surrendering, calling out for guides, guardians. I had a slew of information coming out to me. And it ended up being that I just needed to stop taking meds. And I did. And I finally felt so much better. And I had all the external realities of like, don't do that. It's not good for you. You can't do that. But at the same point, it ended up feeling so much better than anything I could have ever expected. So like that's the biggest thing that I would ever offer to somebody. I mean, acupuncture or external healers for sure, especially if they resonate with you, I can recommend. But remember, you are your biggest healer. You are the first person who is ever able to identify anything that goes on with you. And as much as somebody else might be able to help assist and facilitate, like I like the term healing facilitator, not a healer, because I can only facilitate your healing. I can't heal you. You are your healer. So within there, it's kind of like calling out for the healer that you need is a good thing too. Because sometimes like we go to our counselors, but counselors can only help us so much until they're like, well, it's literally up to you. You have to take your power back. And that's exactly where my pain was in my lower stomach area, which is again that creative energy field. And I had given my power up to my partner then of 5 years. So it was at that point I'm like, okay, no, we've got to take our power back completely. So I think that's the biggest thing, is coming back to taking our power in like not in a demanding way, but in like truly loving, compassionate way. Because sometimes we give our power up unexpected or unaware because we've been doing it our entire lives. I mean, we come down as babies, and sometimes that's our trauma. We have to work through whatever, our parents conditioned us to. And that goes back into like what a traditional male is supposed to be like. Are you supposed to be all tough and gruff? Or are you allowed to have your emotions? Are you allowed to wear that frilly pink dress if that's really what you want to wear? Or are you forced into wearing the army, camo? It's like the dichotomies of our world. It's like you were forced into one or the other. You can't really, I mean, you can't. You're totally able to do both. You can do whatever you want. We just got to get out of our head about that it can only be one way. Yeah.
Well, no, I absolutely agree with that. And, again, speaking metaphorically on that issue, about 8 years ago, I began running into some minor cardiac issues. And at the time, I was also getting to be much more serious about building a life with my current partner. We had been seeing each other for a couple of years, but we were now getting to the point where, like, do we move in together and things like that. And at the time, I think he might have been a little bit scared off by the fact that here I was supposedly going to be the person he wanted to spend his life with, and now I was potentially facing a life-threatening illness. So I had to ask myself, why is this coming now? I mean, it's, I'm finally on the verge of a relationship that seems to be going really well. Why would I have something like this coming along? And what had occurred to me was, I had some previous relationships that didn't work out, and they made me skittish about committing, about getting involved. Like, did I really want to go through the same kinds of issues again that had happened in the prior relationships? Did I really want to experience those kinds of feelings all over again? I was in my mid 50s at that point, and I was saying, a little old for this kind of stuff to keep coming up. Um, but by the same token, this is a person I dearly loved and really cared about and wanted to make a life with. And I realized after I went into the hospital, I had to have a couple of cardiac blockages cleared with the installment of stents. And afterward, I felt physically remarkably better. And I realized that that particular incident told me that I was finally really, quote unquote, opening up my heart and allowing this person to come into my life. And we've been together ever since, and happy as clams and the whole bit. And that's really what it took. I mean, there a lot of times these traumas do serve a greater purpose in the long run, if we can recognize what lesson that they were trying to teach us. And that's what it did in this particular case. It allowed me to open my heart and be able to freely express the kind of unreserved, unconditional love that I needed to have in order to make a relationship work. So, am I thankful for having had the trauma? Well, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be where I'm at if I hadn't gone through it. So,
It's all we can do is be appreciative of the trauma because it's there to teach us a lesson. Like,
absolutely.
and teaching us how to grow and how to show up for ourselves and others. Like, you were talking a second ago about people in their, their 50s going through all these sudden life changes because they've been doing a job that they got right out of high school that they ultimately didn't like. They weren't exactly exuberant over it. They were just doing it because that's what they were told that they had to do. And instead now they're finding who they really are. It's like, I'm 32. I'm like, I've already seen all of those pathways. I'm like, no. And now I'm just over here figuring out my own pathway of what feels resonant for me, And it's like with our partners, sometimes like you have to know where you want to go to kind of help your river steer. And then only through there can other streams kind of merge with you. But to like forcefully go and try and take over another stream or take over another person's energy of like, no, you're now a part of my life, then that creates some weird energy that's like, that's not what you really want. And then you've got like a toxic pollution in your river that you didn't ask for.
Yeah, I've gone through some relationship trauma, and it really took me on a really weird path where I had this relationship. It was the longest one I had at that point, and it went south like really fast. Within a day, it went from I'm gonna propose to, we hated each other, and it was so bad for three years. I didn't date anybody. I wasn't in any kind of relationship. I didn't let any kind of intimacy get very far. I would connect with somebody and then kind of run away from them because I was scared to get into a relationship that might hurt me the way that one did. So it literally took me many years to be able to learn about myself and to really honestly when I was like, okay, I don't need a relationship. I am a complete person by myself. I'm fulfilled by myself, and maybe I'll just go meet some cool people, make some cool friends. And I ended up meeting the partner that I'm with right now, and honestly, we've lived together since the very day we've met, and she's helped me to heal so much trauma, and we've been together for 6 years now. And basically my longest relationship to that point was maybe a month. So um, like you're all saying, yeah, it does, it is really hard to go through this trauma and this pain and this heartbreak, but the lessons that it brings, if we can accept them, if we can acknowledge them, and we can learn them, we become so much, so much more. We become so much better. I'm such a better person. I feel like I'm a much better partner in a relationship than I was way before. So just really grateful that we have these opportunities to learn about ourselves.
It's interesting that you should say that too, because at the time that I met my current partner, um, he and I both had, not long before we met, been in other relationships that didn't work, and we had each been in a number of partnerships where things just ultimately didn't work out, and had gotten to the point where we both said, you know what, the hell with it, with this relationship stuff. It just doesn't seem to be working. So we ended up letting go of the idea of being in a relationship, and then we found each other. So I mean, I think that's another case that proves the value of letting go, because we had this expectation, each of us, that we have to keep looking, we have to be um, dedicated to the search for finding a partner. And ultimately, when we kept harping on that, it kept resulting in failure. So when we finally just said, you know what, we're going to let go of this, then we found each other. And it's one of the pieces of advice I've often recommended to people who, whether they're gay or straight or whatever, when they talk about their woes with not finding a partner, I say to them, stop looking and let it find you. Because when you do that, you're going to end up very likely with somebody who you're much more blissfully happy with than if you kept trying to wrestle the notion of finding somebody to the ground and saying, I got to find somebody, I got to find somebody. Which again, that's something that probably is a feeling that got drummed into many of us, and we held on to, jealously all of our lives up to that point. And it's only when we finally let go of that and realize that it's not really necessarily a valid course, that we end up finding our soulmates.
And something within there is like, for me, especially right now in my path, I'm single, and I'm actually working on exactly what you're just saying, is like letting go of expectations and just surrendering and allowing for the universe to then kind of provide that perfect level relationship that is really going to be able to help facilitate whatever growth further is needed for me in this now timeline, right? Because it's like, when we try and like put all these expectations of like, oh, they got to be like this tall, this thing, that, like, those are like what you think that you like. Okay, cool. So you can have that. And I mean, I've literally to the T kind of called in for the exact type of person that I'm interested in, and then realized I'm not actually interested in that, like, at all. And then so now it's like, you know what? Just surrender. Allow the universe to go ahead and say, okay, you're surrendering. You're now allowing us to just provide for the relationship that would actually facilitate your growth. Go with that, because then it's going to have a different harmonic. It's going to have a different feeling versus just base physicality. It's very dense energy versus like a more twin flame kind of energy. It fills you with light, and you get excited, and you're able to like amp up your energy like consistently. It's like, just go with that. That facilitates your growth. Like, at least for me, that's exactly where I'm at, is just allowing that energy. It's actually kind of funny because tomorrow I have a call with a person who's doing single to 6 month soul partnership is like one of his courses that he's doing. So I'm engaging with that, and I've been paying attention to his messages literally for like 3-4 months, like consistently. And I'm like, yes, you have this awareness of like how to dial into love in that capacity. So I'm like, yes, I would love to work in with you, because I feel like fundamentally to love somebody else, you have to actually like yourself. And I feel like that's a huge path work of where we're going to go, is all about self-love, because through self-love, and remember that you are deserving of love exactly as you are right now, with no need for improvement, no need for change. Because again, that's putting expectations of, oh, I'll only be lovable if I'm physically fit, if I'm, if I shave my hair off or whatever, and all of that, throw that out the window, because you are not just your physical form. You are the divine light of God shining through each and every one of us. So, I don't know. There we go.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I do a heterosexual couple who have been married for just a little bit under 10 years. And he up and left his wife one day, just kind of out of the blue. And when I was speaking to her, I said, well, do you have any idea why any of this may have happened? And after thinking about it, she said, yeah, I think I have an idea. And that's the fact that when I had been putting out vibes to the universe about the kind of partner I wanted, I said to the universe that I wanted to be able to meet somebody who I could love unconditionally, but she didn't ask for it in return.
Hmm.
She didn't say, and I want him to unconditionally love me back. And well, I mean, she got exactly what she asked for. She, had an opportunity to be able to love somebody unconditionally,
Hmm.
but she didn't get the person to do the same, in return. So
One of those, be careful what you wish for because you just might get
exactly,
it.
exactly. Well, and what I think this also raises a point in terms of being able to recognize that trauma may not be without its benefits either. I mean, oftentimes they help to facilitate very significant life lessons. I mean, I've read a number of cases of people who have gone through chronic illnesses like cancer, or who have been recovering from severe injuries and car accidents and things like that, where they end up being laid up for a long time. And yes, it is tragic that they have to go through these things, but the one thing that those incidents often do is they give them time to be introspective. It provides them the scenario, I guess you would say, in which they can take the time to do things for themselves as individuals that they wouldn't necessarily take the time to do for themselves if they have been going about their everyday routines. This kind of forces their hand into saying, look, these are things that you've not addressed. These are things that you have to go and take a look at if you want to be happy. So now I'm providing, the universe is saying, I'm providing you the means and the time to do that, and avail yourself of it. I kind of had something like that happen to me many years ago, where I had been laid off from a job for 13 years, and I was out of work for about a year and a half. And I didn't fully recognize the gift that the universe was giving me at the time. It was giving me the time to examine who I was, where I wanted to go with my life, how I wanted to change my career path, and so forth, until after I had finally gotten back to work. And I said to myself, gosh, I squandered that opportunity. I didn't see the benefit that was to come from it. And I vowed to myself that if anything like that ever happened again, I would not do that again. Fortunately, that has not come up, but it still was kind of a wake up call for me, that after the fact, that, you need to recognize that things happen for reasons. Even though they may seem unpleasant, they may seem like uh, you might want to ask yourself, why did I draw this to me, or why has this happened to me? Well, if you take the time to take a look and analyze it and see what your feelings are associated with what's gone down, you have the chance to realize that, and hopefully to get through it quicker.
To fill that out a little bit, though, you kind of disempowered yourself with that. It was like, why did this happen to me, instead of why did I create this, right? Because you did because when you signed up for a job, like you said, I will do this. And then you might have ignored a couple of signs of saying, hey, I don't want to do this job anymore. And then that might be like why we get into accidents at our job. Or I've resonated with this because I did the exact same thing in my relationship. I stayed well longer than I should have. And the universe is like, here's 3 months to now figure out your life. And because I'd broken my leg and I couldn't even walk. And my partner at the time wasn't even willing to take care of me in any way, shape, or form except to feed me. So it went from me doing all the stuff, working 3 jobs, to not able to work at all. And then I got no support back from them. So it's like the universe definitely wants me to make sure that you get to take time for yourself to see where you're really at.
The universe
it's
will
important
like force things to happen to you. Like if you don't recognize things and you don't acknowledge them, something big will happen. The universe will make you realize, and sometimes it's a lot harder than if you were to just be like, okay, that's the thing, but you're pushing it off, and the universe will just force you to do whatever it is.
Well, I think it's important that we make the effort to try to recognize and learn what the lesson is when something happens to us that doesn't seem to be particularly pleasant. I know, for example, over the course of my relationships over the year, each time I broke up with somebody, in the aftermath of it, whenever I would become re-involved with somebody new, I kept trading up. I mean, I kept getting closer each time, um, because what it did was, these situations basically taught me, uh, here's what's not acceptable. Here's what you're not willing to put up with. Here are the feelings that you've experienced now and you do not want to experience again. Um, so you again recognize, acknowledge, express, and then let go. And when I would meet somebody new, yeah, it would be a big step up. And fortunately, through all the years of doing this, when I came to meet my current partner, um, I got the grand prize this time. So that's certainly been it's certainly been valuable to have had those experiences. But some people have said to me, "Well, aren't you disappointed that you squandered all the time going through those experiences?" And I said, in hindsight, no. They were learning experiences. They were important to my growth. They might not have always been pleasant. They might not have always been easy to go through, but they got me to where I am now, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.
Mm-hmm. I think they'll always happen, and I think it's not a matter of if you have trauma, but what kind of trauma and when that trauma has happened or is going to happen. And like you said at the beginning, Brent, it's about learning from that trauma and not letting it hold you back, because you learn a lot from this trauma. It's part of life. It's part of growth. But it's when we ignore it or push it back, or have to relearn it over and over and over again, maybe even in many lifetimes, that it starts to become a problem.
Well, and the other thing I think that's interesting too is that, you might experience a trauma or a setback in one particular area of your life, and then say 6 months later, you experience it in another area of your life, and they might seem like disjointed, unrelated components of your life. But when you break it down and you look at what the core issue was in each of those things, say it may have initially been romance, and the next time it may have been career, and time after that it may have been family. Oftentimes you'll find that there are common threads running through them. It may be, for example, in all those different situations, you've given your power away, or you may have allowed yourself to become disenfranchised in some way. I think it's important to kind of line those situations up against one another to recognize what's the underlying core issue that's permeating each of these different situations, even though they may be seemingly unrelated to one another. And that's important, I think, a lot of times in being able to kind of rewrite your core beliefs about yourself in terms of being able to make adjustments that apply not just in one particular area, but that you can apply across the board in a whole variety of venues. And then that can really make a big difference in the quality of your life, because you've suddenly taken something that you maybe didn't even recognize at all, and now you've infused a new way of looking at it into all these different areas at the same time. And that can pay real big dividends.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think what we'll do is I have a recording that our friend Nick Melnicki sent that I'll play for everyone, and we can talk about that and then maybe share our final thoughts for the episode. Does that sound okay to you guys? Do you have anything more you want to add to what has already been said?
No, that sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah. Good.
Cool. Then I'll go ahead and I'll play this real quick, and then we'll be back with our speakers. And I do appreciate everybody. There's been some people in the chat room that have been chatting during this episode and thanking us for what we are talking about. So I want to acknowledge them and thank them for being here, because it's just really, really nice to see people in the chat room. Okay, so this is from our friend Nick Melnicki. We'll listen in and we'll be back.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Nick. Thank you for sharing all your time and connection to be here today on our topic of healing old wounds. And What's coming through me to share is a sentiment that has been such a focus over the over this year for me, honestly, and in specific over the last few months. A question was shared with me recently that was something along the lines of, what do you need, or what would be the best thing for someone to offer you as you are going through a troubled time or a dense experience? And what I would share with that is, and also what many of us may resonate with, is to have a healthy space where we can be free from judgment, to express ourselves, to feel what we're feeling, and to acknowledge it. And then, in addition to that, to have that healthy space where we can bring and be offered compassion, vulnerability, authenticity, authenticity, not doing what you think someone else needs, not lowering or reducing your feelings because you think they're too much or something, being authentic, and also transparent, be real. And the topic of healing old wounds, whether it's from our lifetime, our parents, our family's lineage, our species, our current time in the solar system and galaxy, whatever the augmentation would be, whatever the flavor would be, we can add things into the equation such as honesty, authenticity, compassion, vulnerability, but most of all, most of all, presence and awareness. If we can communicate on our experiences of presence and communicate on our experiences of awareness as a team, we can support anyone who is healing old wounds. As a team, we can support ourselves to dive into old wounds. And in my process, in my journey of experiencing this myself, I've come to realize one of my biggest sticking points is unconsciously making others responsible for how I feel. And then even deeper into that, I realized that in my past, when I didn't know what I was feeling, but it was overwhelming and intense, that's when I would go seeking for someone else, something else. With pulling all the energy inside, with the inhale, with the internal world, with the space in which your own self is the only one present. Sometimes you know what you're feeling and you know what's going on, and with presence and authenticity and awareness, you can easily take steps forward with patience. Now, on the other hand, when you don't know what you're feeling or what you're experiencing, that is authentically you. And that's okay. It's okay to not have the answer. It's okay to be hurting or having feelings or whatever. And here is where we can bring in patience and compassion and love for our current moment.
Okay, I want to thank you, Nick, for sending that audio in. So he was saying that in the past he would have some kind of traumatic experience or something come up, and instead of looking at that within himself, he went externally and tried to find the answers through somebody else or through someone else. Um, but then he also, now that he has learned a lot, he said somebody asked him the question, what's the best thing that someone has given you through a traumatic experience or through a bad experience? And he said somebody holding space, open, loving space for him to feel what he feels and to be his authentic self. So Brett and Roots, what do you think about what Nick said? Do you agree with it? Do you have anything to add to it?
I feel fundamentally that when we're able to be more authentic in our present awareness towards like whatever it is that we're experiencing, and then being able to express it in like that calm, cool, that witness space almost energy of like, I am experiencing this versus like, oh, this person's making me feel like that. Because he also hit on that was like, it's always you. It's always something that's being triggered within you. So coming and dialing in with authentic awareness of ourself, I feel is so valuable, and I really adore everything that he was saying. Definitely grateful for him jumping in here. Because I love that also he was saying, as a team, we can support anyone when we're focused on presence and awareness. But then through being able to support anyone, we're also able to support ourselves. So I think the pinnacle thing that I pulled from that was like, it's so important for us to have authentic relatability with ourselves, with our experience, so as to then be able to be more authentic with anyone else, regardless of what the situation is, regardless of what's coming up for us. It's so important just to be able to be authentic and not like putting on masks of, oh, I'm your helper, I'm your healer. No, it's like, I'm this being, witnessing this being, having this experience, and holding space for each other like that, with no one on a pedestal or no one a victim, right? I don't like victim consciousness. That doesn't feel good for me.
I get it. Thank you for that. Brent, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the notions of authenticity and integrity, because they all lead to a question of personal responsibility in connection with all this. And I think that's important that we recognize that as another component in terms of dealing with our feelings, because um, our feelings, they ultimately come from us. So if we want to learn how to deal with them, to learn how to grow and develop from them, we have to take ownership. We have to take responsibility for realizing that the feelings start with us. Now, what we do with them is also up to us. And for my money, looking at issues related to authenticity and integrity are a very good place to start. Because if we really want to get the kinds of answers and the kinds of resolutions from these situations that we hope to get, we have to, realize that we're not going to get there by lying to ourselves. We're not going to get there by trying to fudge, our reactions. We have to be brutally honest and recognize this is what I'm thinking and feeling, no matter how much I might dislike it, no matter how much I might dislike myself for thinking or feeling that. That's where we have to begin from if we're going to move forward to work all this out and get the kind of solution in the end that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yes, let's all take responsibility, and also remember we're more, way more than just these thoughts and feelings and emotions, and so thank you both for being here and speaking on this topic, being part of Afternoons with the Dudes. I'd like to give you a chance right now to share any shameless plugs, shout anybody out, and any final comments about today's episode.
Well, I certainly really enjoyed this conversation. It was wonderful. I got a chance to get in some very uh, complex and deep and insightful issues. And I certainly hope that we can have more like these in the future. As for those shameless plugs, please visit my website, brettmarchant.com. You can find my blogs and my books there. And also, please remember that twice a month I'm on Bring Me to Life Radio. as the Cinema Scribe, presenting movie reviews on the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm really just appreciative of being able to gather in this space, to be able to, collectively process traumas and the understandings of how we've worked through it. I feel like that's a really powerful tool to be able to offer ourselves and our community. Because in communicating, we create unity between all being. As far as shameless plugs go, I'm Roots in Flux on pretty much every social media platform, and I talk about everything from spirituality to working out, doing the things that I'm working on doing. I also create beautiful jewelry that's intended to dial in for universal consciousnesses of the divine sources, goddesses, angels, and it's been a lot of fun creating jewelry that's kind of really bringing in the lessons as we're needing to grow. So it's fine.
Beautiful. Well, I appreciate both of you being here so much. And for everybody listening, grateful for you as well. We will be back for another live episode of Afternoons with the Dudes on the first Tuesday of October. Dang. And we'll be talking about unmanaged energy. So tune in for that episode. Thank you all. Have a great day and namaste.